Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived in my house for over 20 years now and never had any issues with neighbors encroaching on my property. My lot is a decent size with a good buffer between the houses on either side, so privacy wasn't a problem. That all changed when the house to my left went up for sale last year. I was worried when I saw the sold sign go up, knowing that a new neighbor could disrupt the peaceful dynamic on our street. My fears were confirmed when I met Karen, the new owner, on move-in day. Right off the bat, she came across as entitled and demanding, bossing around the movers and complaining about trivial things. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, figuring the stress of moving had her on edge. Boy, was I wrong. A few weeks after Karen moved in, I noticed some construction materials stacked up along the side of her house near my property line. When I asked what she was building, Karen casually mentioned adding a detached garage. I reminded her that she needed to check property lines before building anything that close. Karen dismissed me, saying she knew exactly what she was doing. Against my better judgment, I didn't follow up. Maybe I didn't want to start a fight with my new neighbor. Well, that was a mistake because a few weeks later Karen's new garage was finished. And guess what? It was encroaching at least 5 feet into my yard. I immediately went to speak with Karen. As calmly as I could, I showed her where my iron marker was compared to her brand new garage. She refused to come look, saying she hired professionals so clearly there was no mistake. I emphasized that her garage was on my land and would need to be torn down and rebuilt within her property line. Karen said there was no way she was doing that after all the money she spent. Then she had the audacity to tell me to talk to her contractor because it wasn't her problem. At that point, I knew being polite wasn't working. I contacted my lawyer who advised me to get a professional survey done. The results confirmed that Karen's garage encroached almost 5.5 feet into my property. Armed with the survey, I presented Karen with a cease and desist letter, giving her 30 days to get her garage off my property. She crumpled up the letter and threw it in my face, yelling that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. I stood firm and said I'd see her in court if she didn't comply. Well, 30 days came and went with no action from Karen, so I followed through and had my lawyer file suit against her. She showed up to court full of righteous indignation, ranting about how I was picking on her for no reason. The judge reviewed the survey and deed information and sided fully with me. Karen was ordered to demolish the encroaching garage at her own expense. Karen fought the ruling, insisting there was no proof her garage actually sat on any of my land. Exasperated, the judge mandated that we get an official county surveyor out to reconfirm the lines. Of course, the county's results matched the private survey I had done earlier. With no way left to argue, Karen resorted to begging for more time, claiming she couldn't afford to rebuild right now. The judge held firm on the previous order, giving her only an extra month to get the garage moved. As the deadline approached, I still saw no activity at Karen's place. Part of me wondered if she was just going to refuse to comply and deal with the consequences later. But surprisingly, on day 30, a work crew showed up and began dismantling the garage. I watched with satisfaction as they tore it down and cleared debris from my property. Karen stood nearby the whole time, alternating between taking photos and yelling at the workers when they got close to her precious landscaping. Within 2 days, the garage was gone, and the boundary between our properties was once again clear. Karen never said a word to me the entire time, but the angry glares I got spoke volumes. I considered offering to split the cost of her new garage if she agreed to build it a few feet further inside her lot line. But I decided that might come across as gloating. In the end, I was just relieved to have my land back to myself. Karen learned an expensive lesson about encroaching on other people's property, and I gained peace of mind knowing she won't be building anything else near our shared boundary anytime soon. This experience made me extra vigilant about monitoring my property lines. And you can bet if I ever move, I'll have new neighbors sign something making them aware of the exact lot boundaries. After dealing with Karen, I learned the hard way not to be so trusting, even when it comes to an innocent-looking garage. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When I, 25F, was 3, my grandparents passed away. They set up a savings account in my name. The account was meant to be accessed by me when I was 21. At that point, it contained just over 300K. My grandparents left me a letter saying they would like me to share the money fairly with any other Smith-Jones children, meaning my full siblings. Dad's a Smith, Mom's a Jones. By fairly, they meant that they wanted me to assess the situation and judge for myself what was fair. I never had full siblings, but I have two half-brothers, Mac and Joe Smith, who are dad and stepmom's kids. Due to the specific wording my grandparents used, I legally never had to give Mac or Joe any money. However, I see Mac and Joe as my brothers, and as the money came from our grandparents, I felt that the fairest thing would be to assign each of us 100K, so we all got an equal-sized lump sum, and I figured that when Mac, the youngest, turned 21 and took his 100K, we could split any remaining money. When I turned 21, Dad suggested I buy a house with my 100K. I found a place I loved, but it was 130K, and I couldn't get a mortgage, so Dad said I should borrow 30K from the account. I did, figuring I could pay it back before my brothers turned 21, and I have been repaying it. The account should be at 208K right now, but due to me withdrawing and then repaying that money, it's at 195K, so I still owe 13K. Joe turned 21 recently, and as I was giving him his 100K, Joe noticed that there was less in the account than there should be. I explained and said I was going to put it all back before Mac, now 19, turns 21. Joe told Mac, and both boys said I stole from them and owed them the full 13K back plus $3,000 of interest that they felt they would have gotten, and they wanted it all paid by this summer, which gave me less than 6 months to bring the account up to 211K. I said I'd do it, but over 2 years as planned. The boys then wrote up a contract to that effect. I went to sign it until I saw that it said 6 months to pay it all back. I wouldn't sign as we agreed on 2 years. They said I should figure it out as they were entitled to that money and would be seeking legal advice. Later that day, I got an email clearly written by them saying that they intend to sue me for the 16K, plus whatever is currently in the account, and additional damages and emotional distress on top of that. At this point in time, I'd given Joe about 50K of his 100K because he wanted it in installments. I responded that legally, they were never entitled to any of it, and given their attitudes, I'd say they've already received an amount I deem fair, so that 50K was all they were getting. I then got a barrage of texts, calls, and emails yelling at me for going back on our deal. I blocked them. They then took to social media, saying that I was trying to screw them out of their inheritance and rallying our extended family into harassing me over this, and it mostly worked as a lot of people messaged me. However, I got a message from this guy called Chris Smith. Chris said he was 27 and claimed to be my half-brother. I had never met him before, but he sent me photos of him as a kid with our dad, grandparents, and me. He showed me that he also had an account with 150K in it and a scan of a letter from our grandparents, saying this money was meant to be shared fairly among Dad's illegitimate children. Chris also told me we have another half-sibling who is 18. He'd been looking for me for a while, but only found me when Dad shared Joe's post, which had me tagged. We checked with a solicitor to make sure, and as the boys are legitimate, they aren't entitled to anything in Chris's illegitimate kid fund, and as they are my half-siblings, they aren't entitled to anything in my Smith-Jones kids fund either. I sent the boys a letter formally telling them to back off, stop posting about me online, and enjoy the 50K because it's all they're getting. The day they received the letter, Chris got a PM from Dad, asking if the boys can have some of Chris's fund. Chris also said no and told Dad we'd met. I told Mac and Joe about Chris and our other half-sibling, with Chris's permission, so it looks like my grandparents, knowing about Chris before they passed, set up 2 funds. One for the kids Dad had with my mother, who was still his wife when they passed, and one for children born out of Dad's affairs, presumably to make sure no one tried to screw anyone else over, out of hurt feelings. I'm getting a lot of crap, but holding firm on my decision. The boys have realized that I won't back down on this, and it sounds like I've caused a schism at their house, as Joe has all the money and no intention of sharing, so Mac is now feeling twice as screwed. Plus, stepmom apparently did not know about the other half-siblings, or that my half-sister was born after she and Dad got married, and she's made Dad move into a hotel. It sounds like Dad is looking for a long-term living arrangement outside of the family home because it looks like she is not letting him move back in. Dad is begging me to reconsider, but honestly, I'm done with all of them, except Chris and my sister. The next one is a petty revenge story. Near a decade ago, I, NB, 20 at the time, attended a hospitality school. Just for extra knowledge, as I had already done hospo for 3 years in various places. Every class is run by students, including the kitchen, but you have lecturers who make sure operations run smoothly, and each class will be mixed from students who are new to those who are senior, learning management roles. On certain mornings, I was in the coffee section. Food is cheap, coffee is cheap, and you'd expect to deal with fewer Karens. But let me tell you, you dealt with some of the worst when you got them. I loved the process of perfecting coffee. I hated people with ridiculous orders. Why do you need half soy, half skim milk? Donna from design. What is the purpose? And John from marketing? 1 4 shot of decaf coffee? Really? Why? Well, we have one old biddy, let's call her Ellen, who liked to come in with her friends and would order a soy flat white, extra hot. Seems simple enough. Except Ellen would let it sit for 10 minutes, complain it's not hot enough, and then demand a remake. I knew her well enough that I had tried to avoid remaking her coffees by making the cup as hot as possible. It didn't matter what I did. She sent it back. I told Ellen she shouldn't leave her coffee to sit for 10 minutes. She told me that her whole table got cold coffee, that it tasted dreadful, and she talked to my teacher about my coffee-making skills and poor attitude. My lecturer told me to just remake it. I argued that it doesn't matter how good the first one is. She always sends it back after not touching it. I don't make bad coffee. My lecturer knows this, the teaching chefs know this. I made sure I was perfect at it so I didn't have to smile at anyone. Balance, you know? Just remake the table's coffees. I'd had her cross me 3 times too many. I had dealt with her on the floor long before I got switched to coffee, and I had 20 minutes until my class was done. Screw Ellen, she can have this remake. And I remade it all right. I took that soy milk to hell, concealed the hideousness via a perfect foam appearance. I sat her cup under the steam wand. I put boiling water in the cup and made sure it was a hazard to touch before putting the coffee together. I still had 3 other coffees to remake after all. The lecturer had put up with her for years, and I chose today to make sure Ellen knew she messed up. Her friend's coffees were perfect. Ellen got Satan's a-hole in a cup. I iced the handle on her cup and sent it. The lecturer handled the delivery, and I waited for the complaining. Her friends said their coffees were wonderful. Ellen yelled at my lecturer. My lecturer, docket in hand, ripped Ellen a new one, backed my coffee skills too, while telling Ellen that bullying students wasn't going to be tolerated, that if she hates our coffee so bad, go somewhere that doesn't have students. I made myself a coffee and stood near the bar, watching Ellen not so generously force herself to sit and finish her lunch with a bad coffee. She didn't ask for a remake in my other shifts, and I made sure to deliver them personally. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened during my engineering course. I've had this teacher for math in the 2nd year. She was kind of a jerk, blowing small things out of proportion, screaming at anyone who made a mistake, just wanting to make life harder for anyone she despised. That kind. We were pretty much used to her, so we generally laid low on her radar. But this changed when she was appointed as the first-year coordinator, similar to a head of department but for my juniors. She started coming late for classes, and any instance of misbehavior would make her skip what needed to be taught in that class and leave. This was a bad thing, since I didn't even know what I didn't know, and math was generally hard at this point. Now the tests were coming up, so she gave us some problems and a bunch of reference materials and problems that should have been taught in class, asking us to solve and submit them so she could review and correct in case of any mistakes. We scrambled and hustled, finally finishing them on time. But we waited, and waited, but we never got those books back. On the day of the test, I go to her and ask for my book. She's completely forgotten about it, starts panicking, and when I offered to come again later, she stops me. She says that since she was so busy with her new duties, she couldn't correct them, and seeing that I'm free, I need to go through them as anyway. It will be like a revision for the test. I'm irked. I'm not exactly free as I had a class coming up, but she's not ready to listen to anything and hurries off elsewhere. Having no choice, I start correcting it. It takes around an hour and 15 minutes just to finish a book. She comes back, sighs, and asks me to not be lethargic and pick up speed and goes away again. Cue malicious compliance. I start ticking everything, wrong problems, incomplete problems, Blank pages. I don't care. So after around 20 minutes, I've finished everyone's book, and I go to look for her. Since this part of the campus is relatively small, I look for her in the small possibility of places she might have been, and lo and behold, I find her in the cafeteria, chatting with other professors, drinking coffee, having a great time. She sees me and comes along, telling that she was in a meeting but is free now, and asks whether the work is done. She then tells me to go back and wait for her as she will come in 2 minutes. All the guilt of doing half-assed work, no work, vanished by this point, and I waited for her in her cabin, where she comes back after 10 minutes. She puts her signature on the corrected books and tells me that it's my responsibility, that it will be delivered to their owners. No, thank you. Nothing, just more work. I begrudgingly give them back to everyone, and by now I had lost around 3 to 4 hours and hurriedly prepare for the test. By this point, I haven't thought of the implications of what I had done because I just wanted to get out of doing her work for her. Then when the results were shared, 73% of the people had failed the test. Her cabin was stormed with pretty much everyone who insisted that they had done exactly what they did in that book, which she corrected, but still didn't get any marks. She sees me standing by the door and calls me out. "You! The one in the blue shirt! Come here at once!" This teacher doesn't even know my name and used such a lousy way of identifying me. I'm angry, and I slip away since there were many students wearing blue shirts. This ensured more chaos as she claimed it was that person's fault, not hers, and led to a couple of shouting matches between her and the students. Finally, the management gets involved in this and they started reviewing what she had done, and it turns out she was giving many of her duties as a professor to other students, updating attendance, marks, who had come to her cabin asking for doubts/help, etc. They were pissed, and she was demoted to her former post and suspended without pay for 6 weeks. She was angry and lashed out at the board members on social media, giving wild accusations against them. She deleted her posts when they informed her that if she gets another complaint against her, she will be demoted even further. But sadly, as it was the middle of the year, the professor couldn't be replaced, and she continued teaching in my class. I tried to wear a blue shirt whenever I had her class just so she would be constantly reminded of what I did to her. The next one is an entitled People Story. My late husband's ex is a crazy woman. This isn't based on anything he said. He wasn't one to badmouth people in general. At the beginning of the relationship, all he said was, "That was a very bad time in my life, and I'd like to leave it in the past. I'd erase it if I could. A do-over where we never met would be better." As we got more serious, I learned more. She had cheated, tried to convince him to start a family with her, possibly because she was pregnant by one of her affair partners, and then maxed out all of their credit cards before leaving the country. He was stuck paying it off, so it didn't affect his credit. She returned about a year before we started dating and tried to reconnect through mutuals. He had to change his number twice. The second time, he also cut out a considerable number of friends who had given his first new number to her. And then she somehow got my number. She sounded friendly enough, but 1, how did she get my number and why was she calling me? 2, I have savvy, manipulative family members and she wasn't even an amateur compared to them. She tried to butter me up by saying we have so much in common because of our great taste in men, but there was something that I should know about him before things got too serious. She invoked the sisterhood and how she couldn't in good conscience stand by and say nothing when a fellow woman was about to make a big mistake. I let her talk because I wanted to know what kind of BS she would spew. After I hung up, both my and my husband's social circle tightened a little more. Her social circle decreased too. Specifically, she cut out a lot of people for allowing him to become engaged to me. How could they betray her and let that happen when she was his one and only soulmate? They were meant to be together, and would have been if I didn't get in the way. She never really gave up, but we ignored her and blocked as needed. Fast forward. After my husband passed away, a friend called and nervously asked how I was feeling before leading up to whether I had been on Facebook that day. The ex had posted a long, tearful post on his memorial page about her loss, how heartbreaking it was to know that she would never see her soulmate, the great love of her life, ever again. She included pictures of their engagement and wedding. She rambled about her utter emotional devastation and how no one could understand her great loss. I deleted the post and blocked her from the group, and my social circle once more decreased in size as I cut out the people who liked her post or offered support in the comments. The next one is an entitled Parent Story. So, this is an older story, but I've been waiting to share it, and this sub is perfect for it. Entitled Mother F, entitled Father. A common thing in my family is my parents demanding that I buy them items on Amazon because, well, they are entitled. I have Amazon Prime, so I understand using my account. However, they also make me use my debit card to pay for things. And eventually, they do pay me back. Still, it's incredibly annoying. It's never been a huge amount of money, but this time it was a set of chairs worth $500. I initially rejected the idea, mainly because I am still in college and only made $10 an hour at the time. $500 was about a quarter of the money I had in my bank account at the time. I told my this, and she went off on me, claiming I don't love her and that I don't trust her to pay me back, and she begins to cry. Basic parental manipulation tactics. I comply and buy her the chairs, and I'm out $500. She then tells me she will pay me back in about 3 days when my father gets paid. 3 days later, still no money. To avoid a fight, I just bite my tongue. Then a week passes and then another week. After about 2 weeks of not being paid, I was incredibly pissed off. I also worked almost every night this summer at a customer service job, so naturally, I wanted to relax on my days off. Cue my parents, who decided we needed to deep clean the entire house. I am helping, and then I receive an email about an interview for an internship that I've been working hard to accomplish. I'm reading the email, and that's when it happened. So are you going to do any work today or just sit on your ass all day? Me, pissed off, tired. Really? You're going to say that after I bought those chairs for you? You ungrateful son of a expletive. I pay for your college. Me. I'm not doing anything until you pay me back the $500. Now crying. You're so disrespectful after everything we've done for you. Some fun details, my parents actually don't pay for my college. All the loans are in my name. My father's ego was hurt after bringing up that fact. I threatened to return the chairs, which only caused more fights. Long story short, I had to literally tattle on my father to my grandmother to get my money back, and they now have their chairs. This is a normal thing, and I really see myself going no contact in the future. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.